Hello and welcome to another marvelous video. It's great that you could join us as we continue exploring the backstories of iconic Tekken characters. And today's character is the cyber Robin Hood Yoshimitsu. He is the one character who links the universes of two very famous game series developed by the famous Japanese multinational video game developers Bandai Namco, Tekken and Soul Calibur. Yoshimitsu is actually the title name of the sword, as well as the chief of the Manji clan, whose mission is to plunder the affluent and give to the needy. His appearance has become more machine than man over the years, with a combat technique evocative of both ninjutsu and medieval Japanese swordplay. So without much further ado, let's take a look at this iconic character's origin story, beginning with his journey in Tekken. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, then please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Tragic origin of Yoshimitsu explored. Yoshimitsu's exact name and origins are unclear, as is whether he is Japanese. All that's known is that he enjoys video games and sumo wrestling, while despising losers and villains. He's the Manji clan's leader, a band of old Robin Hood-style criminals who plunder the affluent and corrupt to provide for the needy. Yoshimitsu made his debut in Tekken in 1994. According to Kunimitsu's Tekken 2 tale, Yoshimitsu's katana, of the same name, which means good fortune light, is passed down through the Manji clan's commanders as each one is ritually slaughtered and the blade absorbs their power and expertise. Yoshimitsu was intrigued when Heihachi Mishima, one of the richest and most devious men in the world, declared that he would be hosting the Tekken tournament. Yoshimitsu had no desire to win. Instead, he only wanted Heihachi's wealth. He deftly devised a plan to enter his tournament as a distraction strategy while the Manji clan stole the tournament's operating funds. Yoshimitsu loses his right forearm and hand during the raid, but is discovered by a scientist, Dr. Boskonovich, who replaces it with a cybernetic prosthesis and assists him in escaping. Following that, Yoshimitsu ordered Kunimitsu, a fellow Manji clan member, to leave the clan after she was found stealing for herself. In Tekken 2, when Yoshimitsu discovers that Dr. Boskonovich is being detained against his will and compelled to work for Heihachi's firm, now run by his son, Kazuya Mishima, he enters the second Tekken tournament. He is successful in freeing Dr. Boskonovich, but he must also battle Kunimitsu, who wants Yoshimitsu's cherished sword. After 2 decades had passed, Dr. Boskonovich's daughter died and was cryogenically preserved until Dr. Boskonovich discovered a technique to resurrect her, with Yoshimitsu assisting in raising research money. When Yoshimitsu finds that Dr. Boskonovich suffers from a rare blood illness, he enters the third Tekken tournament to get blood from Ogre, a supernatural creature whose blood is crucial for Dr. Boskonovich's survival. Yoshimitsu committed himself to provide shelter, medicine, and food to a growing number of destitute and needy people, but he and the Manji clan always had difficulty doing so. Yoshimitsu attended the 4th Tekken tournament in an attempt to reach an agreement with Heihachi Mishima for financial assistance. Yoshimitsu was able to meet with Heihachi, but the ancient old Scrooge was just as bored as Yoshimitsu had predicted, and it was revealed that his Manji clan had plundered Heihachi during their quarrel once more. During the raid, Yoshimitsu discovered the cyborg Brian Fury, developed and then abandoned by Dr. Abel, who needed his assistance and took him to Dr. Boskonovich. Yoshimitsu receives an urgent communication from Dr. Boskonovich and hurries to his lab, only to discover that Brian Fury has repaid their benevolence with destruction, nearly killing Dr. Boskonovich and murdering other Manji clan members. When Yoshimitsu hears that Brian will be entering the King of Iron Fist Tournament 5, he makes it a point to find Brian Fury and bring him to justice. Yoshimitsu sensed his sword was weakening while searching for Brian Fury. His sword is cursed, and if it was not used to murder wicked people, its effects would turn on Yoshimitsu and drive him mad. Therefore, Yoshimitsu got a second sword to offset its effects. This second sword was called Fumaken, which could lock the cursed blade's qualities, and he joined the King of Iron Fist Tournament 6 to restore the cursed weapon's potency. potency. The character of Yoshimitsu may also be found in other Tekken games like Tekken Advance, Tekken Tag Tournament, and Tekken Tag Tournament 2. Tekken Tag Tournament also inspired a comic book called Tekken Forever, which was written by Dave Chi and Paco Diaz for Image Comics. The narrative was chaotic and the comic was terminated only after one issue. Yet there was enough Yoshimitsu to notice. He teamed up with Lei Wulong to take on Brian Fury and made enough quips to suggest that he was being represented as someone from the Marvel Universe, even breaking the fourth wall. Yes, it's Deadpool. While the original Tekken marks Yoshimitsu's first official appearance, the origins of his legend would be revealed in 1998 with the release of a game called Soul Calibur. The sequel to Soul Blade or Soul Edge, depending on which version you have played. The game is set in the late 1500s and revolves around a big evil blade covered with creepy eyes called the Soul Edge. Of course, Yoshimitsu was thrown into the mix, or to be more specific, Yoshimitsu was thrown into the mix. In the game, Oda Nobunaga, the Japanese leader, wanted the secret Manji clan to join his forces. Yoshimitsu went and graciously rejected for the 100th time. But when he returned home, he saw that Nobunaga's men had killed off the whole clan in retaliation for the insult. Yoshimitsu pursued Nobunaga but was defeated by his army and had his arm severed in combat. Yoshimitsu proceeded on a one-person expedition to locate the most brutal sword ever and exact his retribution, replacing his arm with a cyberpunk prosthesis. Yoshimitsu followed the trail of a bloodbath after hearing about an Azure Knight slaying everything with a massive eyeball sword. He determined that there were better courses of action than vengeance at some point throughout his quest, since he didn't want to become a metaphorical monster like Nobunaga or a real monster like Nightmare. Yoshimitsu never came upon the terrible knight, but he got close enough that traces of the Soul Edge's darkness seized his own blade, giving it an otherworldly shine. Yoshimitsu was determined not to let the katana's wickedness overpower him and set out to defeat it. He went on to become a heroic bandit who protected the poor and the vulnerable. He developed a name for himself and others sought him out to join his cause. The Manji clan was reincarnated as the Manjitsu, with Yoshimitsu I as its leader. In Soul Calibur 2, he appeared with another Soul Cross Tekken link in which Heihachi Mishima mysteriously traveled back in time in the PlayStation 2 edition of the game. Here's a fun fact for you all. Originally, Cloud Strife was scheduled to be the only guest character in Soul Calibur 2 for the PlayStation 2, but the agreement fell through and Heihachi was included instead. Returning to the tale in hand, Yoshimitsu's antagonism was inevitable, as his policy of taking from the rich and giving to the poor was the opposite of a gimp like Voldo, who is obsessed with accumulating goods for his long-dead master. The fact that they are both as unconventional as they come further adds to the theme, and that's what makes things interesting. His clan has two significant interests as of Soul Calibur 3. The first was to uncover riches and distribute their wealth to the impoverished, and the second was to locate and destroy all remaining shards of the Soul Edge. Unfortunately, that expedition ended in tragedy when one of Yoshimitsu's finest troops went wild after being exposed to a fragment of the shattered sword and betrayed the rest of the clan. Even after all of these prequel games, it needed to be made clear whether Yoshimitsu was a concept of legacy or was he just an immortal with a goofy fashion sense. Soul Calibur 5 made it clear that it's the former, as Yoshimitsu discovered the resurrection of recurring series nemesis Cervantes and determined to stop him. In contrast, Yoshimitsu died due to his age and lack of character value. He lived long enough for an heir to murder him in combat and steal both his sword and name. Even though the doomed Yoshimitsu I was able to sever the successor's arm before succumbing for good, Yoshimitsu II did not do much well. Outside the primary narrative mode campaign, Soul Calibur 5 lacked endings. Therefore, Yoshimitsu was mostly ignored. Then it was revealed that Soul Calibur 6 would be a rewrite of the previous games. Thus, Yoshimitsu II will only be remembered for his lovely skull mask within an Oni mask style. The lineage lasted for centuries, with each generation having a new Yoshimitsu to carry the sword, since it said that once you take up the mantle, the blade can't be used against you. Back to Tekken 1, where Yoshimitsu entered the King of Iron Fist competition to toy with the selfish Rikishi Ganryu and eventually took a chunk of his riches to give to impoverished people like Martial Law and his family. What makes Yoshimitsu so powerful? The character of Yoshimitsu is primarily rule breaker and one of the most unpredictable characters. He has an unequaled assortment of unique skills in the series, including healing, health siphoning, flight, self-harm, weapons, and teleportation, in addition to his bizarre distracting attire and daring battle shouts. He is a figure that may humiliate and confuse opponents, causing them to make blunders. Many of his dramatic visual pranks and gimmicks are exceedingly hazardous against stronger players, leaving him susceptible to assault. In order to balance, several of Yoshimitsu's most incredible abilities may be utilized to interrupt, punish, and dodge skills that the rest of the cast is statistically incapable of avoiding. Yoshimitsu's combat style combines ninjutsu, which is a samurai-style sword technique based on kenjutsu and batujutsu, unusual postures, and supernatural powers. He is a master swordsman, martial artist, and a ninja with the strength and wisdom to become the leader of the Manji clan. Yoshimitsu is one of the first fighters to adopt fighting stances in his martial arts because of his fighting style, which gives him a wide range of strategies and mobility for various opponents and circumstances. He usually fights in a way that keeps his weapon at bay. His regular attacks execute standard punches and kicks, and his specials allow him to wield the sword freely. It appears that he does this to keep things fair and non-lethal for his foes in the ring, or to keep in check with the tournament rules. Let's examine some of his most prominent positions while we are on the subject. One is meditation, where he heals himself while facing away from his adversary. Another is the Indian stance, introduced in Tekken 2, where he sits in an Indian-style posture while healing himself. He also uses the Manji dragonfly posture, introduced in Tekken 5, turning his sword and his artificial left hand to float midair. Additionally, he has a flee position, in which he stands on his sword by burying the point into the ground and encircling the hilt with his hands and feet. Another is his kinchu position, where he will shout Hisatsu and signal to take out his wakizashi. When a particular button is touched, Yoshimitsu will remove the wakizashi from its casing and deal harm to his adversary. Yoshimitsu is able to sheath his sword and engage in combat without it as of Tekken 6, and he can also employ his second sword in certain of his strikes. Speaking of his sword, Yoshimitsu can fly by rotating his sword with his mechanical left hand in a windable motion, perform slashes with it, use it to impale his adversary, and more. He also uses his sword to impale himself or an opponent, inflicting harm to both parties in harakiri maneuvers. Yoshimitsu enters the 6th King of Iron Fist tournament after discovering that the sword is cursed in Tekken 6 in an effort to learn how to control it. His new sword, Fumaken, reverts to his previous sword in his Tekken 6 ending after absorbing Azazel's core, and as he strikes the ground with it, a large shockwave bursts from the blade, splitting Azazel's temple. Yoshimitsu's sword no longer illuminates in Tekken 6, since it is now corrupted and losing strength. Tekken Tag Tournament 2 clearly demonstrates the corruption. Threatening appearances of Yoshimitsu in other games and media. Yoshimitsu made a non-canon appearance in the 1998 animated film called Tekken, the Motion Picture, as a minor character. He competed in the tournament as one of the fighters. We were treated to a live-action Tekken film in 2010. Unfortunately, we were given a distorted version of Yoshimitsu and a distorted version of the game's narrative. The most incredible Yoshimitsu-like armor we have ever seen was most likely on him. He appeared to be in very decent shape. Besides that, we had a Kazuya Mishima soldier who engaged Jin Kazama in a sword battle until Jin accidentally distracted Heihachi and Jin won the battle. After non-canon game with a vast selection of fantastic closing cinematics was Tekken Tag Tournament 2. Sadly, 3 of them were devoted to Yoshimitsu being made fun of. In a jungle, Raven and Yoshimitsu engaged in combat off-mission. After killing Yoshimitsu, Raven went back to his job. In the same woodland, Kunimitsu is involved in combat with him and appears to prevail before snatching Yoshimitsu's blade and escaping. Then Yoshimitsu tried to attack Brian in his own lair, but Brian avoided all the unseen swordplay, pushed Yoshimitsu through a wall, and then set off a bomb he had tagged him with. At least, Yoshimitsu gave us an awesome ending in which he defeated Brian. Yoshimitsu was able to avoid the laser beam and charged through it with his sword acting as a deflector, despite Brian carrying a massive laser cannon. When Brian was finally cut in half, he once more erupted after joking about dying in the most stylish manner conceivable. We had the novelty of playing as Yoshimitsu in Capcom's Street Fighter Cross Tekken, who had returned to his Tekken 3 appearance. The game's storyline saw numerous duos vying for possession of a strange box named Pandora that had crashed in Antarctica. When Yoshimitsu heard his cursed blade being summoned to it, he hired Raven to keep an eye on him. Raven then insisted that they remain covert and discreet, as Yoshimitsu made jokes, spoke in Yoda-like tones, and frequently changed his mind. Yoshimitsu insisted on meeting Vega and Balrog in an honorable manner as their opponents. Their conclusion ultimately resulted in Yoshimitsu temporarily being controlled by a sword and assaulting Raven. Yoshimitsu left with the Pandora box on his back after Raven became unintentionally locked within. The fact that this game had various cross-alternate clothes was an attractive feature. That implies that the characters may adopt the attire of certain fighters from the rival franchise. Yoshimitsu made the most of this by dressing like M. Bison and wearing a mask with the gold Shadalu insignia. Now that's an alternate reality we would all like to see more of, right? Yoshimitsu's most ridiculous appearance, speaking of which, was an full-on octopus guy in Tekken 7. He had a lot of tentacles hanging from his back and head for no apparent reason. Unfortunately, the only lip service most other characters received was a series of one-fight campaigns where chosen characters would battle an opponent and receive an unending sequence because of the game's primarily Mishima-based narrative. Leo was Yoshimitsu's opponent, and one of two things would happen when they fought. Leo would either triumph and then remark on Yoshimitsu's appearance before leaving, or Leo would kick Yoshimitsu below the belt before leaving. To coincide with the release of Tekken 7, Titan Comics issued a 4-part Tekken comic miniseries created by Kevin Scott and Andy Tong. Even though it carried on the conflict between Kazuya Mishima, Heihachi Mishima, and Jin Kazama, it at least managed to bring the other series stalwarts into the picture by having Jin assemble a strike team consisting of Yoshimitsu, Panda, Ling Xiaoyu, Paul Phoenix, and Nina Williams. Yoshimitsu's only task was to make Phoenix look odd and offend him. Yoshimitsu, in whatever guise he takes, is a part of Namco's lifeline. Tekken and Soul are fighting game genre outliers because their protagonists are rarely decent. In the initial installments of each series, the protagonist triumphed only to begin a reign of terror. But what about Yoshimitsu? There have been several of him, but they have all followed in his footsteps by cracking down on the crooked and assisting the vulnerable while looking ludicrous and rad.
I'll create a diversion.
Marvelous verdict. Every time a new Tekken game is unveiled, fans wait in anticipation for Yoshimitsu's new look. This psychedelic, katana-wielding ninja has remained at the top of fans' greatest Tekken characters rankings since his appearance in the original game. His outrageous tauntings, his backward-facing movements take most players off by surprise, and his disappearance trick works so effectively when combined with his other skills. Yoshimitsu is so famous that he even has a permanent cameo appearance in the Soul Calibur series. Considering all the above points, Yoshimitsu is one of the most essential and favorite characters from the universe of Tekken. Who is your favorite Tekken character? Let us know in the comments below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.
Do you think this is all some kind of joke?